Imagine stepping into a bustling marketplace where the scent of olives and wine mixes with something more unsettling, the auctioneer's voice echoing across the square. "Step right up, ladies and gentlemen. Today only. Half price on shepherds. Buy one gladiator, get the second with a complimentary set of chains." It sounds like a bad parody of Black Friday, but this was the reality of Rome's slave markets, where human beings were reduced to price tags and bargaining chips. Rome prided itself on order, law, and civilization, yet its economy thrived on the wholesale buying and selling of people. Families were split for bundle deals. Strong young men fetched a premium, while the weak or elderly were pushed to the discount rack. Auctioneers shouted as if selling grapes, while the merchandise, breathing, terrified human beings, stood under the sun, marked with chalk and humiliation. This was the auctioneer's discount day, Rome's grotesque version of a clearance sale, a carnival of cruelty disguised as commerce. And here lies the bitter joke of history. The same society that built marble temples and wrote lofty speeches about liberty built its wealth on buying lives at a discount. Today, we peel back the curtain on this satirical tragedy, where laughter catches in the throat and discounts meant a human soul sold cheap. Chapter 1. The Marketplace of Flesh. The Roman morning sun rose bright over the marble facades of the Forum, but no priest lit incense that day. No statues were unveiled. Instead, carpenters hammered wooden platforms into place. Carpenters who had likely been purchased on one of these very platforms years before. The smell was not of olive oil or bread, but of sweat, leather, and the raw anxiety of people who had been transformed into merchandise. The marketplace of flesh was opening, and Rome, that eternal bargain hunter, had come to buy. The auctioneer stepped forward, draped not in the toga of a senator, but in a patched cloak, part ringmaster, part butcher. His voice was a weapon sharper than any gladius. "Step right up, citizens of Rome. Today's sale, strong shoulders, quick hands, pliant backs, all at prices that would make even Cato himself smile. Buy two, get the third half off." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Coins clinked. Already, human beings had become coupons. This was no accident of the day. Rome's economy had been built on these grotesque morning spectacles. Every victory in war was followed by the question, how many bodies can we sell? A conquered city was not measured in temples, toppled, or banners raised, but in the human cargo it could deliver to the auction square. It was a perverse math, but one Rome understood well. Wars filled markets. Markets filled treasuries. Treasuries built legions. Legions fought wars again. And so the cycle spun on, greased by chains and blood, wrapped in the neat bow of civilization. The crowd was a theater unto itself. Wealthy matrons leaned forward, pointing at young girls as if choosing fabric for tunics. Farmers eyed strong arms, imagining them plowing their fields. Gladiator trainers watched with predatory hunger for the kind of muscle that could be sharpened into spectacle. And in the corner, overlooked but always present, a few children huddled, staring at the stones beneath their feet, waiting to discover whether they would be sold as bonus items or defective stock. Rome loved a discount, even when the discount was human grief. On the stage, the auctioneer tapped the shoulder of a man dragged from a line. The man's tunic had been torn open, so buyers could see the definition of his muscles, as though biceps carried warranty papers. "Look at this one, citizens," the auctioneer bellowed. "Strong enough to pull an ox cart, disciplined enough to obey. Who will start the bidding?" The man clenched his jaw. His name was gone now. In this place, he was no more Marcus, Diodoros, or Lucius. He was simply Lot 27, starting at 30 denarii. A hand rose in the crowd. Then another. The numbers grew. The auctioneer's voice carried them like a hymn. 35, 40, 45, 50. Each coin was another nail in the coffin of his past. The hammer fell. The man was led away. No applause followed, only the rustle of parchment recording property transferred, like livestock or land. Another human life had been liquidated. The grotesque parody of a market continued. Some buyers poked teeth, pulled ears, bent fingers to test dexterity. Others demanded the captives run a short distance to prove stamina. Those too old or too young were bundled together and discounted like bruised fruit. Rome, after all, was practical. Better to offload unsellable stock quickly than waste time pretending their lives mattered. And here, the satire of empire revealed itself most nakedly. For this was not barbarism at the fringes of civilization. This was civilization. This was order. Senators wrote speeches about liberty, while scribes, slaves themselves, copied decrees authorizing these auctions. Poets sang of Roman virtue while ignoring the screams muffled by iron gags. It was all so normal, so efficient, so Roman. The Great Republic prided itself on law, but here the law itself was discount day. People turned into coupons, liberty reduced to price tags. Perhaps the darkest humor lay in the haggling. Buyers prided themselves on shaving denarii off the price of human children. 35 is too much for this one, a farmer might scoff. He looks weak, I'll give you 25. The auctioneer countered. Ah, but see his legs. He will grow strong, 28 at least. They bantered as if debating the cost of a clay jug, while a child's life hung in the balance. Rome, ever the pragmatic shopper, sought savings even in suffering, yet beneath the grotesque comedy was tragedy. Families torn apart as if they were mismatched sandals sold in bulk. A mother reaching for her child, her arm wrenched back as the child was led to another buyer. The auctioneer barked at the crowd. 2 lots, 2 directions, twice the profit. The crowd chuckled. The mother wailed. Rome's appetite was satisfied. The marketplace of flesh thrived on laughter and tears, and the laughter always won. By midday, the square was quieter. Purchases had been led away in chains, their future already measured in plows turned, stones lifted, lashes endured. The coins clinked heavily in the auctioneer's purse. He wiped his brow, satisfied with another day's work. Around him, the marble statues of senators and gods watched silently. The irony was unbearable. The Republic's monuments to justice and piety rising over a stage where justice was strangled and piety gagged. What remained was silence. A silence filled not by speeches or songs, but by the absence of voices that would never be heard again. The market closed, the stage dismantled, but the stain of that day lingered in the stones, invisible but permanent. Rome called it commerce. History remembers it as carnage disguised with price tags. And so, the auctioneer's chant echoed beyond the square. Buy 1, get 1 free. 2 for the price of 1. Discounts for bulk orders. A marketplace of flesh where the product was people, and the coupons were chains. Rome may have believed it was building empire, but in truth, it was only printing receipts of its own moral bankruptcy. And like all receipts, history would eventually present the bill. Chapter 2. Rome's economic engine. Blood for balance sheets. If Rome's greatness could be measured in columns of marble, then its soul could be measured in columns of numbers. Not numbers of citizens or victories, but numbers of bodies converted into assets. Rome was the first empire to master human accounting, turning victories into inventories, people into spreadsheets, and freedom into ledger lines. The city was not only the capital of an empire, it was the headquarters of humanity's most efficient conversion of blood into balance sheets. The senators knew this. Behind closed doors, cloaks draped and scrolls unrolled, their voices rattled, not with concern for justice, but with the familiar anxieties of businessmen. How many slaves from Gaul this season, one might ask? What are the current prices for Syrian silk weavers? Another would reply. The Senate was less a forum of lofty ideals than a corporate boardroom, where conquest was the business model and slavery the product line. Expansion was not a patriotic duty. It was quarterly growth. The engine ran on predictability. Wars were not merely fought for territory, but for headcounts. When Crassus crushed a rebellion, when Caesar marched into Gaul, the question was always, how many captives? Human beings were the dividends of victory. Some were sold at auctions, their value determined by muscle or youth. Others were funneled into mines, into kitchens, into fields. A few, unlucky or exotic, became curiosities, displayed like rare coins in aristocratic villas. Rome loved variety. The empire treated humanity as a buffet, and like any well-oiled machine, the system was self-feeding. Slaves harvested the grain that fed the soldiers who captured more slaves. Slaves mined the silver that minted the coins used to buy yet more slaves. Rome congratulated itself on efficiency, never noticing that its entire economic miracle was a grotesque Ouroboros, a serpent eating itself tail first. Only this serpent was made of people. Yet Rome clothed this horror in the language of progress. Economists of the day, those scholarly parasites scribbling beside marble columns, spoke of labor supply and market stabilization. What they meant was that enough chains had been forged, enough backs broken, enough voices silenced to keep Roman villas glowing with oil lamps and fountains spraying water in marble courtyards. They never mentioned the bones under the foundations. Or perhaps they did, and merely called it infrastructure. The satire of it all was unavoidable. Rome, the self-proclaimed mother of law, made theft legal if it was large enough to be called conquest. Rome, the paragon of order, built its order on permanent chaos for others. To be Roman was to believe that freedom was natural, so long as it was your own. Everyone else's freedom was simply raw material for Roman convenience. The empire did not merely practice slavery, it industrialized it, wrapped it in scrolls and statutes, and sold it with the dignity of a government bond. The auctions fed the economy, but the economy fed the illusion. Roman citizens, walking down the marble streets, congratulated themselves on their civilization. They saw clean aqueducts, theaters filled with laughter, baths where steam curled from hot water. They saw comfort and luxury. What they did not see, or refused to see, was that every brick, every coin, every song sung in the amphitheater was lubricated by the tears of people who had no names left, only numbers. Civilization was not the absence of savagery. It was savagery repackaged with a Senate seal, and so the paradox deepened. Rome saw itself as eternal, yet it could not function without the constant replenishment of human stock. A drought of conquest was not just a military setback, it was a fiscal crisis. Prices rose when supply fell. Speculators hoarded bodies as others hoarded grain. Human beings became commodities in the most literal sense, traded, inflated, devalued. The invisible hand of the market was not a hand at all, but a whip. Some Romans, the occasional philosopher, dared to question this grotesque arithmetic. Seneca, from the comfort of his villa, mused that perhaps slavery was unnatural. He wrote elegant phrases about the brotherhood of man, phrases scribes copied while chained at his feet. The irony was thick enough to choke on. Rome loved philosophy so long as it stayed in ink, not action. The thinkers could afford their compassion precisely because their comforts were supplied by the very chains they half-condemned. The machine rolled on. Slaves dug Rome's canals, paved Rome's roads, cooked Rome's food, raised Rome's children. They were invisible except in moments of rebellion, when suddenly the city remembered they existed. Then the machine sputtered, gears grinding, senators panicking, generals scrambling. Rome's greatest terror was not Carthage or Parthia. Rome's greatest terror was its own engine breaking down. Because without slaves, the empire wasn't an empire at all. It was just a city of marble, crumbling under its own arrogance. The economic miracle of Rome was no miracle at all. It was the world's first grand Ponzi scheme. Each conquest promised returns to investors, new lands, new gold, new slaves. But like all schemes, it required constant expansion. The moment Rome could no longer feed its hunger, the system began to rot. Villas fell into disrepair, fields went unplowed, senators lost their fortunes. And yet, when history tells the story, it speaks of decline, not of the truth. The market collapsed because the product was people, and Rome had run out of coupons to cut. So when modern minds marvel at Rome's engineering, its laws, its poetry, they marvel at what was built, but rarely at what it cost. The aqueducts shimmer with genius, yes, but they were dug with blistered hands that never held freedom again. The Colosseum inspires awe, yes, but its stones were mortared with lives ground down to dust. The balance sheets of Rome added up neatly, but only because they subtracted humanity first. This was Rome's economic engine, efficient, brutal, absurd. A machine that ran not on coal or steam, but on bodies stacked like kindling. And for centuries, it worked. That was Rome's true genius, its ability to disguise exploitation as progress, cruelty as commerce, blood as balance sheets. The satire is that the very empire which called others barbarian was itself the most refined barbarism ever devised, polite, documented, legislated, profitable. And so the engine turned and turned and turned until the gears finally cracked, rusted not with time but with blood. For no machine, however mighty, can run forever when its fuel is human suffering. Rome believed otherwise. Rome believed its market eternal. Rome was wrong. Chapter 3. The Discount of Humanity. Families as bargains. If Rome's auction houses were the heart of its slave economy, then the discount day was its pulse. Steady, grotesque, and absurdly ordinary. On such days, families were not torn apart by misfortune or famine, but by mathematics. The market was slow, the supply was high, and the auctioneer needed to move product. The product, of course, was people. Nothing revealed the satire of Rome's economy more vividly than when mothers became coupons, children became free add-ons, and dignity itself was marked down like surplus grain. Picture the scene: a wide square, sun glaring off marble columns, and rows of human beings standing as still as livestock. Behind them, chalkboards scrawled with prices. The auctioneer, greasy toga, booming voice, a salesman of suffering, raises his arms and calls for bids. The crowd is restless, eager, not for justice or fairness, but for bargains. Rome, the empire of law and order, reduced humanity to clearance sales, and like any market, there were deals to be had. Buy one strong man, get a child half price. A mother's worth increased if she came with milk still flowing. A family could be split into packages: husband for the fields, wife for the kitchens, daughter for special services, son for the stables. Rome's efficiency lay not in mercy, but in logistics. To the Lannistai, the speculators, and the buyers, people were inventory, and inventory moved faster with promotions. The satire was crueler still in the details. Auctioneers crafted pitches with the same slickness as modern advertisers. "This one speaks 2 languages," they would boast, as though selling a book. "That one has strong teeth," they'd declare, prying open a mouth like a horse dealer. And when the bids lagged, the discount came. 2 sisters together for the price of 1. Families were not families. They were bundles, tied with rope instead of ribbon, discounted like damaged pottery. Rome congratulated itself on its orderliness, but in truth, its auctions were circuses of absurdity. Citizens haggled over the price of a man's life while tossing figs to their children, as if shopping for trinkets in a marketplace. Senators' wives fingered fabrics in one stall and pointed at trembling women in another. To Rome, there was no contradiction. Humanity and merchandise existed on the same shelf. The only difference was whether the item screamed, and yet the discounts carried their own form of dark comedy. What Rome thought of as economic necessity was, in truth, a grotesque parody of fairness. Bundle pricing was not an invention of modern retail. It was alive and thriving on Rome's auction blocks. The absurdity was complete when merchants justified it with the language of generosity. "We keep families together if the buyer can pay," they claimed, their smiles as counterfeit as their mercy. In truth, families stayed intact only if intact meant profitable. If splitting them brought higher returns, then the axe fell not on trees, but on bonds of love. Some Romans, with smug satisfaction, praised themselves for buying families whole, thinking it an act of kindness. They told themselves they were preserving dignity, when in fact, they were simply purchasing larger bundles. Their villas filled with grateful slaves who owed not freedom, but the illusion of family stability to their new master. It was not kindness, it was corporate branding, a way to polish cruelty until it gleamed like virtue. The children, of course, bore the sharpest edge of the satire. Too small to plow or weave, they were marketed as add-ons. "Buy now," the auctioneer would shout, "and in 10 years, this boy will repay you tenfold." Childhood was not a season of innocence. It was a future's contract. Rome did not wait for children to grow. Rome invested in them like property. A crying infant was not a burden. It was a potential dividend. A loss leader, as merchants might call it today, sold cheap now, profitable later. Meanwhile, the slaves themselves stood in silence, caught in the farce of being priced. Some prayed, some wept, some stared with the hollow gaze of the already broken. Their lives had become numbers. Their loves turned into calculations. A husband might watch his wife sold to another master, his child bundled in the same deal, his pleas drowned out by the auctioneer's booming calls. And the crowd laughed, because in satire, laughter is the mask that hides cruelty. The paradox of Rome's discount day was that it was both ordinary and monstrous. To the buyers, it was just another Tuesday, another chance to expand their estates, their kitchens, their harems. To the sellers, it was commerce, efficiency, the turning of inventory. But to the slaves, it was apocalypse masquerading as business. And in that dissonance lay the empire's true absurdity. Rome convinced itself it was civilized, even as it turned families into coupons. Even the language betrayed the rot. Auctioneers spoke of quality stock, of investment returns, of sound purchases. The Senate wrote laws regulating prices as if protecting consumers, not people. Philosophers debated the ethics of treating slaves kindly, as though kindness could erase chains. It was all performance, a satire so sharp it cut the very idea of humanity into fragments. And yet, as grotesque as it was, the discount day revealed Rome's fragility. A system that must discount its human fuel to keep running is not a system of strength, but of desperation. Rome claimed to rule the world, yet it could not rule its own greed. Every discount was a confession. There were too many captives, too many bodies, too much dependence on a market of misery. The empire was drowning in the very blood it spilled, and rather than admit the absurdity, it slapped a price tag on it. So when modern minds look back and shake their heads at Rome's cruelty, they must also see the satire in its logic. The auctioneer's discount day was not a glitch in the system. It was the system, laid bare, stripped of marble and rhetoric. Rome built aqueducts, theaters, and laws, yes, but it also built discount racks for human lives. And in that grotesque parody of commerce, the empire revealed itself, not eternal, not noble, but absurd. A marketplace of misery, where families were coupons and humanity was always on sale. Chapter 4. The Theater of Chains. Slavery as Entertainment. In every empire, the greatest luxury is not gold, nor marble, nor silk. It is boredom. The wealthy grow tired of their banquets, tired of their villas, tired even of their own reflections in polished bronze mirrors. And so they invented a new pastime, the suffering of others. The Romans, masters of both roads and cruelty, perfected this pastime. They built amphitheaters not as temples to art, but as shopping malls of agony. What do you do when the bread is stale? Add circus. And what is circus, if not the staged humiliation of those at the bottom, so that those at the top might momentarily feel alive? The gladiatorial games, dressed in the language of honor and martial valor, were nothing more than blood-spattered theater. Behind the noble rhetoric of virtues and discipline lurked an accounting ledger. Slaves bought in bulk, trained just enough to survive a few swings of steel, and then sent out like disposable props in a play called Empire. The audience clapped not for skill, but for novelty. The dwarf fighting the giant, the woman against the beast, the condemned criminal against starvation. In this economy of amusement, human beings became stage effects. The cost of a single lion might be high, but lions do not scream in Latin. Slaves did. And the screams were half the show. It was not simply combat, but comedy. A prisoner slipping on his own blood became slapstick. A terrified man begging for mercy became a punchline. The arena was a factory of punchlines, with corpses as the laugh track. The masters applauded themselves for being civilized. "See," they said, "we offer our slaves a chance at glory," as if a choice between death in the mines and death before an audience of 50,000 was a choice at all. Yet the satire wrote itself. A republic built on chains, congratulating itself for letting its chains sing before it snapped them. Slavery became not only labor, but spectacle. The bodies that harvested grain by day became the ornaments of murder by afternoon. Rome could not resist turning utility into entertainment. It is one thing to own people. It is another to demand they die beautifully for your boredom. And the audience? They cheered. The same citizens who wept at tragedies in marble theaters laughed as boys bled in sand. The same matrons who prayed to household gods whispered love notes to gladiators, seeing in their scars the erotic outline of forbidden freedom. The games were a mirror, not of the slaves, but of the Romans themselves, grotesquely enlarged. But satire does not rest in antiquity. The Theater of Chains has many sequels. Centuries later, when the transatlantic trade made entire continents into supply chains, the games returned in subtler forms. On plantations, punishments became community theater. Overseers gathered the enslaved to watch one of their own flogged. The lesson was discipline, but the staging was deliberate, an open-air amphitheater of terror. The screams were currency, the audience captive, but compulsory. In other words, entertainment was never absent, only reframed. The grotesque humor of history is that suffering, once monetized, always finds its way into a show. The Romans filmed theirs in sand. Later empires broadcast theirs through sugar, cotton, and coffee, the sweet taste of cruelty hidden in every cup. To study this is to see how laughter itself was shackled. The masters laughed not only at the jokes they told, but at the people they owned. And in that laughter lay the deepest irony. The enslaved, in their despair, were the true authors of Rome's comedy. The spectacle was satire, but the satire was not theirs to enjoy. History teaches us that slavery was never only about work. It was about theater, about showing dominance in public, about turning pain into festival. The slaves worked the fields, yes, but just as importantly, they worked the imagination of the masters, who rehearsed their superiority every time they demanded screams as proof. Thus, the theater of chains survives in every society that treats suffering as content. Whenever we watch misery packaged for amusement, we replay the same script, the bored rich demanding performance from the desperate poor. The curtain never falls, only shifts. The actors change, the amphitheater modernizes, but the grotesque humor remains, and so the satire writes itself, eternally. Empires measure their strength not only in marble arches and iron swords, but in the volume of laughter wrung from the throats of the chained. Chapter 5. Coupons of Flesh. The Auctioneer's Discount Day. The sign went up at dawn, nailed to the wooden post outside the square. Discount Day, 2 for 1 on able-bodied labor. Children half off. The marketplace stirred like a carnival. Merchants pulled their mules aside, taverns filled early, and Rome's citizens gathered with the same enthusiasm they might show for a chariot race. Today wasn't just an auction, it was a clearance event. Flesh, bone, and spirit, bundled and bargained like grain sacks. The auctioneer strutted to the block with the swagger of a man who believed he was Rome itself in human form. He wore a crimson tunic to match the morning sun, and in his hand, a scroll thicker than any holy book. He unrolled it like scripture and declared the rules. Buy 1 adult, get a child thrown in. Discounts for bulk purchases. Damaged goods marked down. The crowd cheered. Housewives craned their necks. Senators scribbled tallies in wax tablets. Bargains were not only expected, but celebrated, because in the Empire of Rome, even cruelty knew how to run a sale. The slaves were lined up in rows, their backs straightened by fear rather than pride. Chalk numbers were smeared across their foreheads, tags dangling from their wrists. One man whispered that he used to teach philosophy. Another had once commanded ships. But on discount day, everyone was simply merchandise. "Here!" the auctioneer bellowed, slapping the shoulder of a young man with arms roped in muscle. "A gladiator in training. Normally 10 minas, but today, 7. And if you buy his brother too, I'll throw in the mother at no extra charge." The crowd roared with laughter. Mothers in the audience clutched their own children tighter while nodding approvingly at the bargain. Next came the damaged stock. Men scarred from battle, women bent by hunger. "Scratched but functional," the auctioneer cried, the same tone one might use for pottery with a crack in the glaze. "Perfect for field work, where no one will notice." The hammer fell again and again. Flesh moved like coin. Coins moved like water. The square filled with the rhythm of buying, selling, shouting, laughing. Rome congratulated itself not just on its power, but on its thrift. Even conquest had to be cost-effective. By midday, the smell of sweat and fear mingled with roasted meat from the food stalls. Children skipped between the crosses of merchandise, mocking the slaves with chants. "Half price! Half price!" Their voices rose above the din, like a chorus for the empire's economy. And yet, behind the laughter, behind the cheer, something else lingered. An old woman selling figs muttered that Rome was discounting not just slaves, but itself. Every bargain drove nails deeper into its own soul, though no one wanted to notice. The auctioneer didn't care. His hammer rose high once more. Remember, citizens, flesh is fleeting, but savings are eternal. Rome is strong, not only because it conquers, but because it knows a good deal. And so the day ended, the scroll empty, the block stained. Some went home pleased with their purchases. Others went home empty-handed, but satisfied to have witnessed the spectacle. The slaves went home too, if home is the word for chains and labor. The sun dipped behind the city walls. The sign outside the square fluttered in the evening wind. Discount day successful. Check back next month. Rome's greatness, it seemed, was built not only on power, but on promotions. And what could be more civilized than turning human beings into coupons? Chapter 6. Returns and Refunds. When flesh didn't fit, the next week, the marketplace was busy again. Not for another sale. No, today was Return Policy Day. Because even Rome, mighty Rome, knew that customers demanded satisfaction, even when the merchandise had names, memories, and bleeding hands. A senator marched in first, dragging behind him a man whose wrists were raw from shackles. "This one doesn't plow fast enough," the senator barked. "You promised me strength, but look, he coughs in the field like an old mule." The auctioneer smirked, tapping his wax tablet. "Did you water him properly? Feed him bread twice a day?" "I gave him scraps," the senator snapped. "Scraps are enough." The auctioneer shook his head with the gravity of a philosopher. "Ah, there is your problem. Slaves are like oxen, Senator. Too little feed, and they sputter. No refunds for negligence." He scribbled in his ledger and waved the man away. Next came a merchant returning a young woman. "The girl sings while grinding grain. It unnerves the household. My wife insists on silence." "Silence?" The auctioneer chuckled. "For 10% extra, you could have purchased a mute. Shall I upgrade you next time?" The crowd laughed. The girl, eyes dull, was led back to the line. No words needed, no refund given. But then came the farmer. He shoved forward a child no older than 10, skinny as a reed. "This one is useless. Too small for the ox cart, too weak for the mill. I was told he would grow, but he hasn't." The auctioneer, with a salesman's grin, replied, "Growth is not guaranteed. Did you not read the terms?" He pointed to the fine letters carved on the block itself. "No refunds, no exchanges. Defects are natural." The farmer grumbled, but the crowd roared approval. After all, even misery must obey the rules of commerce. By midday, the return line snaked across the square. Some wanted replacements, some demanded repairs. The auctioneer explained patiently, as though lecturing a room of children, that people were not amphorae. They could not be patched with wax or traded for grain. Yet Rome pretended otherwise, and the hammer fell in rhythm with the lie. And so the empire invented what it loved most: bureaucracy. Slaves became entries in ledgers, checked like livestock, inspected like pottery, dismissed like spoiled grain. Paperwork grew taller than men, until one could almost forget the human shape beneath the ink. The auctioneer closed the day with a flourish. "Citizens, remember, a good purchase is not about the body you buy, but the bargain you strike. Rome is not just a master of war, it is a master of accounting." The crowd cheered, as if cruelty were cleverness, as if paperwork were justice. The slaves were herded back into their pens, the rejected mingling with the unsold, each one reduced to a mistake on a receipt. And as the sun set, one truth hung heavier than the chains. Rome had found a way to sell humanity twice, first as flesh, then as failure. Chapter 7. The Seasonal Sale. Holiday discounts of flesh. Every empire loves a festival, And Rome was no different. Saturnalia brought gifts, gladiators brought blood, and the auction block brought discounts. The auctioneer announced it proudly. Citizens rejoice. In honor of Saturn's bounty, all human stock is half price until sundown. The crowd howled with delight. Housewives elbowed each other for bargains. Senators tugged at their purses like eager gamblers, and farmers lined up as if freedom itself were being sold cheap. The marketplace became a carnival of chains. At one stall, a plump merchant haggled. "I'll take 2 boys for the vineyard. Strong backs, no questions asked." "2 for the price of 1. Today only," the auctioneer replied. "But beware, they may remember freedom, and memory costs more than muscle." Nearby, a soldier selected a young woman, draped in silence. "She'll fetch wine at my table," he boasted. His friends clapped him on the back, as if cruelty were courage. Children, too, were paraded like trinkets. "A pair of twins," the auctioneer cried. "Buy one, the other comes free. Perfect symmetry for your household." The crowd chuckled, as if human lives were ribbons on a package. The air buzzed with jokes, laughter, coins clinking like music. Rome had perfected its favorite trick, disguising atrocity as entertainment. And in the frenzy, the slaves themselves stood hollow-eyed, caught between terror and absurdity. Some whispered prayers. Others stared blankly at the crowd, as though daring their buyers to look them in the face and see a person, not a purchase. The auctioneer rang his hammer, sealing each sale with a smile. "Rome," he declared, "is generous. Even misery can be festive when priced correctly." As dusk fell, the square emptied. The coins jingled, the ledgers grew fat, and the streets of the eternal city glittered with torches. But in the shadows behind the block, chains rattled softly, carrying no joy, no festival, only the echo of a truth too grotesque for satire to hide. Rome had turned even holidays into harvests of flesh. Chapter 8. Buy one empire, get one free. Rome's loyalty program of chains. If Rome loved one thing more than conquest, it was consistency. Empires are not built on single victories, they are built on systems. And Rome's greatest invention was not the legion, nor the aqueduct, nor even the law. It was the subscription model of slavery. "Loyal patrons," the auctioneer bellowed one morning. "Why settle for one slave when Rome rewards repeat customers? With every purchase of 5, your 6th comes free." Think of it as an empire's gratitude, chains bundled neatly for your convenience. The marketplace erupted in applause. Senators compared their human inventories like collectors boasting of rare coins. Merchants scribbled lists, vineyard hands, household cleaners, gladiators for spectacle, tutors for children. Rome had made bondage into a shopping spree, and loyalty was its own grotesque reward. And loyalty had layers. Veterans of the army received discounts. Their victories paid not only in land, but in people. "March for Rome," the auctioneer cried, "and Rome will march others into your service." Families passed down slaves the way others passed down heirlooms, names erased, but chains inherited like property's shadow. It was efficiency disguised as generosity. Rome had turned subjugation into a point system, and every chain sold was an investment in the illusion of eternal order. A farmer did not need to ask how his olives were pressed. The loyalty program had already guaranteed it. A senator did not wonder who swept his marble floors. His discounts had taken care of that too. And yet, in the small spaces between, cracks appeared. Some buyers noted the dull fire in their new property's eyes. Some caught the faint whisper of a language never meant to bow. A few even hesitated, just for a breath, before handing over their coins. But hesitation never outbid habit. The hammer fell again and again. The loyalty program thrived, and Rome congratulated itself for rewarding loyalty with lives, never noticing that each sale fed a ledger it could never erase. Because behind every transaction, one truth lingered like smoke: an empire cannot discount its way out of its debts. Chapter 9. Clearance sale at the end of the Republic. Every empire eventually runs its market too thin. For Rome, it happened in whispers first. Grain ships delayed, debts piling, senators nervously eyeing their estates. The auctioneer, however, was unfazed. If anything, he saw opportunity. "Citizens!" he announced, striking his hammer with theatrical delight. "Rome may falter, but today, only today, we hold a clearance sale of humanity. Prices slashed, families bundled for efficiency, chains included at no extra charge." The crowd cheered, eager for bargains. Buyers pressed forward like gamblers at a table, convinced that fortune still smiled if only they placed their coin quickly enough. Slaves were stacked in rows, not unlike amphorae of wine or sacks of grain, their value reduced with each heartbeat. "This one speaks Greek," the auctioneer said, "but at today's rate, you can hardly afford not to take him." Rome congratulated itself on pragmatism. Senators praised their thrift. Merchants joked that they were saving money while saving civilization. The absurdity passed unnoticed, because absurdity dressed as normality is the most dangerous of disguises. And yet, behind the clamor, a shadow lengthened. Every bargain was a reminder that Rome's wealth was built not on marble, but on marrow. Every clearance rack of human beings whispered that the empire had run out of imagination, surviving only on its ability to mark lives down like unwanted goods. In the quiet corners of the forum, a few muttered the obvious. When Rome sells its people cheaper than its pottery, is it Rome that profits, or Rome that bankrupts itself? The hammer struck again. Another discounted body was dragged away. And somewhere, in the silence between the laughter and the ledgers, history wrote the receipt. Chapter 10. The Auctioneer's Last Hammer. Rome's Debt to Memory. The hammer always falls. That is the lesson the auctioneer believed, the lesson the crowd applauded, the rhythm that made chains sound like coins. But even hammers crack. Even wood splinters after too many blows. Rome thought it was buying silence on discount day, a final clearance sale, a liquidation of rebellion, a bargain price on dignity. What it bought instead was memory, and memory cannot be resold. Travelers later whispered that the Appian Way smelled of iron long after the corpses rotted. Grass grew thick where blood had pooled, as if the soil insisted on remembering what the auctioneer's ledger tried to forget. Rome counted profits, but history counted ghosts, and the ghosts laughed, not cruelly, not bitterly, but knowingly. For every coin pocketed that day, for every discount given on human life, a debt was written in fire. Empires always forget their debts. Memory never does. So the hammer rests, cracked but still echoing. The auctioneer is dust. The market long closed. The buyers vanished into their own graves. Yet the receipts remain, scrawled not on parchment, but in story, in satire, in the uneasy truth that when human beings became coupons, Rome thought it was clever. But cleverness ages badly. What survives is not the bargain, but the shame. And that is the last laugh of discount day, that in Rome's attempt to make rebellion cheaper, it made freedom priceless.